America's top diplomat.
Senators, if I'm confirmed, I will raise my hand and swear an oath to defend our Constitution for the 7th time in my life.
Mike Pompeo, the president's pick for Secretary of State, appears before a Senate confirmation panel. Syria crisis.
I've never seen refugees as traumatized as coming out of Syria.
Defense Secretary James Mattis faces questions about a possible military response against President Assad. A big act of humility. The Vatican reacts to Pope Francis's begging forgiveness from victims of clergy sex abuse in Chile. And message for the media.
Is he calling us out? Yes, indeed. But he's calling a lot of people out in this document.
What the Pope is asking of Catholic journalists. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, April 12th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump meets with his national security team to decide how to respond to the suspected chemical weapons attack in Syria. The White House holds Russia and Syria responsible for killing more than 40 people in that strike. But Russia warns the U.S. and its allies not to play the role of global policemen. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president isn't saying when the U.S. will strike Syria. Earlier today on Twitter, he said it could be soon or not soon at all. He already announced yesterday that missiles will be coming. Today, he lamented the U.S. being in this position, and he asked, where's the thank you for the U.S. role in helping fight ISIS in Syria?
We're looking very, very seriously, very closely at that whole situation, and we'll see what happens, folks. We'll see what happens. It's too bad that the world puts us in a position like that. But, you know, as I said this morning, we've done a great job with ISIS. We have just absolutely decimated ISIS. But now we have to make some further decisions. So they'll be made fairly soon.
President Trump has called the attack in Syria atrocious. Chemical weapons are never justified, according to an expert on the Catholic Church's teaching on just war.
Those are weapons that would indiscriminately harm, particularly civilians, women and children, and that would not be proportionate. And so those are weapons like chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, even landmines and cluster munitions have been deemed those types of weapons that are always off the table.
We should point out that Syria denies that its government carried out the attack, but France says it has proof the Syrian government launched the chlorine gas attacks. French President Emmanuel Macron says Syria has crossed a line that could prompt French airstrikes. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Democrats in Congress grilled Defense Secretary Jim Mattis about the U.S. military attack in Syria, or the potential one. They questioned the legality and constitutionality. Mattis insists it's justified. Our team coverage turns to Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Mattis tells the House Armed Services Committee he believes Syria recently committed a chemical weapons attack on its people, but he says the U.S. still doesn't have the hard evidence. Today, Mattis faced tough questions about the next step.
Representative Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat of Hawaii, disputes the president's legal authority to act without Congress's consent.
Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the sole power to declare war. Congress has not done so against the Syrian government. The launch of 59 missiles against Syria by Trump last year was illegal.
But Defense Secretary James Mattis says the U.S. is still studying what happened in Syria last week.
Some things are simply inexcusable, beyond the pale, and in the worst interest of not just the Chemical Weapons Convention, but of civilization itself. And so the recognition of that means at times you're going to see contrary impulses.
The top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee tells me the issue of presidential authority is complicated.
There's about an hour-long answer to that question. There's, between Congress's right to declare war, the president's powers as commander-in-chief, the war powers resolution, decades of history, it is far from clear what the answer to that question is.
Iraq veteran and Catholic Congressman Mike Gallagher says it's time for Congress to debate this issue.
Too long. I think Congress has been derelict in its duty, and Congress should step up and actually have a discussion about the 2001 AMF, about amending it. And obviously we're having a broader discussion now about what exactly we should do in Syria. I think whatever we do would be stronger if it was backed by the clear authority of the elected representatives of the American people.
Mattis says the country is committed to resolving the 7-year Syrian civil war, but he accuses Russia of blocking those efforts. Secretary Mattis says he will notify congressional leaders before an attack. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. CIA Director Mike Pompeo promises that if he's confirmed as the next Secretary of State, he will make the State Department central to national security. Lawmakers questioned the man known for his hawkish views today on Capitol Hill. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert congratulating Mike Pompeo after what she called a successful confirmation hearing. She says the State Department is working with Pompeo during his confirmation process. And during today's hearing, Pompeo drew a sharp contrast with the man who used to be in charge here, Rex Tillerson. Pompeo promising to fill dozens of vacant posts and boost the State Department's credibility.
They've also shared how demoralizing it is to have so many vacancies. And frankly, many of them said not to feel relevant. I'll do my part to end those vacancies. I'll need your help.
The former Kansas congressman turned CIA director tells senators if they confirm him, he'll work every day to provide the leadership the State Department needs.
America is uniquely blessed, and with those blessings comes a duty to lead. As I have argued throughout my time in public service, if we do not lead for democracy, for prosperity, and for human rights around the world, who will?
Pompeo was grilled on a variety of topics, from North Korea to Syria and Russia. He confirmed for the first time publicly that he has been questioned by Special Counsel Robert Mueller in the probe on Russian interference in the 2016 election.
Looking at how we're going to deal with a Russia that not only sought to affect our last elections, but is doing so even as we speak, both here at home and across the world, those are substantive questions.
Yes,
and
Senator.
so it's not for me just simply a question of interest. It's a question of understanding what you were asked, how you responded, and what you did.
Pompeo would not reveal the content of his interview with investigators. President Trump announced Pompeo's nomination on March 13th, the same day he announced Rex Tillerson was out. The 54-year-old CIA director is known to have developed a close relationship with the president, who shares similar views on key issues, including opposition to the Iran nuclear deal.
Mike Pompeo admits building the State Department back up will be a big job. He noted key positions like the ambassador to South Korea have yet to be filled. Pompeo says he spoke to all 8 former living secretaries, including Hillary Clinton, whom he criticized over the 2012 attack on the U.S. facilities in Benghazi. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. California's governor accepts the president's request to send the National Guard to the Mexican border. The move comes as 1,000 troops arrive on the Texas-Mexico line. Texas troops will be stationed along the Rio Grande. One city official says the force is more for perception than security. Overall, around 2,000 troops in 4 states have been deployed. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops expresses deep concern over the president's decision to send the National Guard to the U.S.-Mexico border. Bishop Joe Vasquez of the Diocese of Austin says, "Our faith calls us to respond with compassion to those who suffer and seek safe haven. We ask our government to do the same." Catholic bishops on both sides of the border say the decision dehumanizes immigrants. Catholic leaders from El Salvador are urging members of Congress to extend protection for Salvadoran immigrants who are set to lose their temporary protective status. Cardinal Rosa tells us it's in the lawmakers' hands to allow them to stay in the United States legally. Rosa says they are not a threat, they're a blessing to this country. The cardinal was joined by Archbishop Thomas Wensky of Miami, a member of the U.S. Bishops' Conference on Migration.
For over a decade, almost 20 years, the United States Bishops' Conference has been advocating a comprehensive immigration reform because our immigration system is broken.
Earlier this year, the Trump administration announced that it would revoke the temporary protected status, known as TPS, for El Salvador. That means nearly 200,000 Salvadorans will have to leave the U.S. by September 2019. Cardinal Donald Wuerl receives an honor from the president. The cardinal, who is based in Washington, D.C., will be a member of the Commission on Presidential Scholars. The group was founded in 1964. It recognizes the nation's most distinguished high school seniors. At least 15 people are dead after the Taliban storms a government compound in central Afghanistan. Among the dead are 3 top local officials. The blistering strike included an hours-long gun battle. The compound remains in the government's hands. It is the latest attack in the province, which is now largely under Taliban control. Demonstrators in Hong Kong protest the visit of Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. They held signs that read, "Stop the killing." At least 4,000 people have died in the leader's violent crackdown on drugs. 2 Catholic priests are attacked in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A Vatican news agency reports a dozen hooded men assaulted them. One is in the hospital after being hit by a hammer. Some of the assailants were wearing military uniforms. Church officials believe the government is trying to intimidate the clergy. They have led protests against President Joseph Kabila. Germany's last abbey, run by the Brigittine order, will close later this month. It had been in use since the 15th century. The announcement comes as the number of nuns falls below the 3 needed to train novices. The last remaining sister had fought to keep the abbey near Munich open. Scholars feared its precious book collection might be sold, but the diocese decided to keep it intact and digitalize it. The Vatican is speaking out after Pope Francis admitted he made grave errors in judgment in Chile's sex abuse scandal.
The Pope in the letter is basically making a big act of humility. He's saying, I made a mistake. He's saying, I want to personally ask forgiveness of those I've offended.
In a public letter, the Holy Father has invited the victims to Rome to beg their forgiveness. Francis also summoned Chile's bishops to the Vatican for an emergency meeting in the coming weeks to discuss repairing the damage from the scandal. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, this is an extraordinary step by the Holy Father. What has been the reaction?
Well, on the Vatican side, Greg Burke of the Holy See press office said the situation is tantamount to a spiritual state of emergency, and the message to victims is that we believe in you, and you have your place in the church. So this is a recognition by the Pope of the gravity of the situation, and what's interesting is the humility of admitting what he calls serious stakes. And on the Chilean side, Fernando Ramos, the General Secretary of the Episcopal Conference of Chile, he said that when the priests who wrote the report, Archbishop Scicluna, Charles Scicluna and Father Bartolomeo, handed it to him, they were overwhelmed by pain.
Give us a background on this story. I think our viewers need to remember what happened. What led to this apology?
Right, Lauren. So last January, during his trip to Peru and Chile, Pope Francis was asked by a reporter about the Bishop Barros case, and he answered with critical comments in which he accused the victims of possible slander. Now that, of course, caused a huge firestorm in the media and even sparked a public rebuke by Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston. And shortly afterwards, the Holy Father then dispatched Archbishop Scicluna to investigate. And as we know, he worked for many years as the Vatican's chief expert in dealing with the clergy sex abuse crisis. And now the report has come in, and the pontiff has issued this extraordinary apology.
The Holy Father also summoned all of Chile's bishops to Rome. Has that ever been done before, and what can we expect?
Yeah, it's rare, but it has been done before. Now, back in 2002, in the wake of the clergy sex abuse scandal in the United States, John Paul II summoned the American bishops. And in 2010, Benedict summoned the Irish bishops also regarding clergy sex abuse issues. So it's clear that Francis wants to meet the Chilean bishops to find the best way to move forward in this crisis. It's hard to predict what the exact outcome will be, Lauren, but what is very clear is that the Holy Father is taking this very seriously, and he's not shying away from taking responsibility for the grave mistakes that have been made.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent, thank you.
Thank you.
Also in the letter, Pope Francis mentions the media presenting the church in the darkness of the new moon. We will have more on the media and the church in our discussion with Jeanette DeMello later in the show. Coming up, Unsung Heroes, the U.S. Embassy to the Holy See honors a certain group of Catholics. And conflicting reports, President Trump denies wanting to fire special counsel Robert Mueller. But some senators aren't so sure. Kentucky faces a lawsuit over its ban of a common second trimester abortion procedure. The American Civil Liberties Union filed the suit, saying the legislation disregards a woman's medical decisions. But a spokesman for the Republican governor calls the procedure gruesome and says the lawsuit is disturbing. Senators are considering legislation to protect special counsel Robert Mueller from being fired by President Trump. The president has strongly criticized Mueller's investigation into potential ties between Russia and his 2016 campaign.
I think the president is too smart to fire Mr. Mueller. I think if he fired Mr. Mueller, it would provoke a reaction from Congress.
The president should know enough not to fire him. It would be an absolute disaster. We've had this happen once before. It was, let's see, Richard Nixon and Watergate. I remember how that turned out.
The Senate Judiciary Committee is expected to consider the legislation in the coming weeks. Joining me now is Phil Klein, managing editor of the Washington Examiner, going to weigh in on the latest politics news, and there certainly is a lot of it. Let's start with President Trump. Robert Mueller is still on the mind of the president. Earlier today, he took to Twitter. Here's what he said. I have agreed with the historically cooperative, disciplined approach that we have engaged in with Robert Mueller. Unlike the Clintons, ! I have full confidence in Ty Cobb, my special counsel, and have been fully advised throughout each phase of this process. Why is he now stressing past cooperation when he has been attacking Mueller, calling it a witch hunt, and especially after the raid on his personal attorney?
Yeah, I think that we've seen sort of how he's vacillated over time on Mueller. In the sense that, yes, he was frustrated by the raid of Michael Cohen's office. He was talking about the witch hunt. There was talk about, well, now maybe he's more gearing up to firing him. And then he made the comment the other day, well, maybe we will. We'll see how it turns out, kind of, which further added fuel to this fire. And so now he's trying to kind of tamp things down and say, look, we're cooperating with Mueller to try to tamp down the idea that, oh, well, he's ready to, axe him.
Did you hear Senator Leahy say he is equating this potentially to Watergate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it takes much for Democrats to talk about Watergate. So at this stage,
not surprising
yeah.
for you. All right, let's go to the Capitol. I want to get your thoughts on the political implications of Speaker Ryan resigning, and not running, rather. How bad is this for the GOP?
I think that it's bad in two senses. In one sense, it's bad in that it's hard to see that he would be resigning if he thought that Republicans would be doing great, right? Why would he be leaving Congress if he thought the Republicans were going to gain seats and it was going to be terrific?
But he said it's because of his family. I've interviewed him. He's a Catholic man, and he doesn't want his kids to grow up with a weekend dad.
Yeah, but that could be true, and they can kind of both be true. In other words, if he doesn't want to be a weekend dad and he wants to spend time with his family, the impending loss of Republicans makes him think, well, what's the point of sticking around if I can't do anything? So the cost of staying is the cost of leaving is a lot less.
Yeah, the cost of staying. Steve Scalise, who was shot, is being bandied about as the person who possibly could take over for Paul Ryan. Representative Kevin McCarthy, same thing. What would it be the impact of another Catholic, Steve Scalise, who, as Speaker, would be in his position?
Well, I think that many of the issues that are of concern among Catholic conservatives and Catholic Republicans are broadly of concern among Republicans. A lot of the issues, such as protecting life, the fight for religious liberty, that have dominated and been a lot of concern for Catholics, I think that are also a concern, more broadly speaking, among conservatives. So I don't think that you're going to see sort of a big change or any sort of disagreement on a lot of those core issues.
Very good. Thank you so much, Phil Klein, managing editor of the Washington Examiner.
Thank you.
Church leaders in Latin America are proposing the Holy Father call a special meeting of the world's bishops to discuss women. The Vatican Commission includes 24 cardinals and bishops. They are demanding greater opportunities for women in the church at both the parish level and at the Vatican. U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Callista Gingrich, calls religious nuns and sisters the unsung heroes of the Catholic Church. Gingrich was speaking at a symposium in Rome on women religious on the front lines. One of the nuns agrees. Sister Cecilia fights human trafficking in the Philippines. She says, quote, "Religious cannot give birth, but we can give life to humanity, that no one is second class." To read more about this story, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Up next, Pope Francis says the resurrection brings us 3 gifts, what they are when we come back, plus of gods and men, a rare honor from the Vatican for Trappist monks.
Primo, obbedienza. Secondo, testimonianza.
At his daily Mass in the Vatican, Pope Francis says Easter joy delivers 3 traits: obedience, witness, and a concrete love of Christ. The Holy Father says they can lead to persecution because non-believers find true witness to Jesus bothersome. In his recent letter on holiness, Pope Francis has a stern warning for Catholic media. Beware of the sins of the devil. In Rejoice and Be Glad, his apostolic exhortation, he writes, quote, "Even in Catholic media, limits can be overstepped. Defamation and slander can become commonplace, and all ethical standards and respect for the good name of others can be abandoned." Joining me now is Jeanette DeMello, editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register, our sister publication. Jeanette, we're both members of the Catholic media. Do you think this criticism is justified?
I'm not sure that he is only speaking to us, and this is definitely not the first time. He's done it quite a bit in his daily homilies, urging us not to fall into slander and to gossip. He has some pretty strong words in a document that is supposed to be on holiness, so I think it does call us to examine our own consciences and say, are we guilty of some of this? And at times I think there is room to change.
He was really taking a swipe at critics in Catholic media who complain that maybe he's too liberal. Is the role of the Catholic media to criticize the Pope? What standards should there be?
You know, I think you're right. There's quite a bit in this document that calls out, you know, if you want to use these terms, the Catholic right, or those who lean towards conservatism. And I saw that, and I was a little bit surprised by how much of that is there. I think that we do have a role to examine what the Holy Father has said and how it squares, if you will, with the rest of Catholic teaching. That's the role of a Catholic journalist. But first, we really do need to strive to represent what he has said very accurately.
Because Catholic media outlets reported that the claims by a 93-year-old Italian journalist and professed atheist that Pope Francis told him hell doesn't exist and the disappearance of the souls of sinners exists. So from an ethical standpoint, Jeanette, when you see these stories, how do you deal with that?
That's where the Catholic media has, I think, a responsibility to help correct some of the immediate reactions that happen in the secular media. I mean, sometimes the secular media hears what they want to hear and they run with it. They don't really take the time to say, well, how accurate is this report? And it's our role to take a step back and say, okay, what really did he say? Let's not react to what we think he said. Let's listen to it. Let's read it. Let's find the good in it, the truth in it, the accuracy. And then we can then begin to compare it to the the continuity of Catholic teaching.
This kind of media criticism wasn't as prevalent a decade ago, and now the Pope and President Trump are agreeing. So why now? What has changed?
The environment has changed. Everyone becomes a journalist, if you will, or everyone becomes a media personality on the internet. And so there's this constant pressure to be first, to speak the loudest, and of course the shrillest voices often get heard.
Thank you so much for joining us. Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register.
It's good to be with you, Lauren.
And finally tonight, 7 French monks martyred in Algeria in the 90s will be beatified. The Trappist monks were depicted in the 2010 award-winning movie Of Gods and Men. Pope Francis in January recognized their martyrdom, along with 12 others killed in hatred of the faith in Algeria between 1994 and 1996. A government spokesman says the Mass will be held in the coming weeks. Beatification is the last step before sainthood. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.